Socialism and Individual by N.D. Kamari. Chapter 1. The emancipation of the masses is the main condition for the emancipation of the individual. The socialist ideal and its realization in the USSR. The chapter opens by quoting the manifesto of the Communist Party, which posits that the mission of the working class is to build a socialist society where the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. The author immediately asserts that this society has been successfully built in the Soviet Union. The Great October Socialist Revolution is presented as the historical event that confirmed the correctness of scientific communism and ushered in an era of unprecedented development for the individual's creative powers and talents. The Soviet people are not seen as a static group but as a population forged and steeled through a series of intense historical struggles. These include the fire of revolutionary class struggle, the Great October Socialist Revolution and the subsequent Civil War, the fight against foreign intervention, famine, and economic backwardness, the monumental efforts of socialist industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture, the ultimate test of the Great Patriotic War against fascist invaders. The victory in this war is portrayed as a world historic triumph, not just of arms, but of the Soviet social and political system, the Communist Party's policies, and ultimately, of the new Soviet man. This new individual is characterized by an unbending will and clear conscience, guided by lofty communist ideals, like Soviet patriotism and friendship among peoples. The author argues that only a generation raised under the Soviet system could have passed such a severe test and saved the world from fascism. Countering capitalist propaganda, the author directly confronts what they term slanderous inventions and fabrications spread by imperialists and their ideological supporters who are afraid of socialism's growing influence. These anti-socialist arguments claim that socialism suppresses and expunges individuality, personal initiative, and talent, destroys personal rights and liberties, equalizes personal wants and tastes, creating a monotonous, baroque-like existence. The author contends that these are old lies aimed at frightening the petty bourgeoisie and other sections of the population away from supporting socialism. The primary counter-argument is the reality of the Soviet Union itself, where the high development of individuality tears to shreds this whole fabric of calumniations and proves the superiority of the Soviet socialist system. A Marxist critique of the individual under capitalism, the chapter contrasts the scientific, Marxist analysis of the individual with the abstract and idealistic reasoning of bourgeois philosophers. Marxism rejects the notion of an individual, in general, and insists on a concrete, historical, and class-based examination. The core of the capitalist system is bourgeois private property. The author, citing Marx and Engels, clarifies that communists do not seek to abolish all property, especially not personally acquired, self-earned property. Instead, the target is specifically bourgeois private property, a system whose existence requires that the vast majority of society has no property at all. Under this system, the concept of the individual and freedom is warped. The individual as property owner. When the bourgeois complains that communism destroys individuality, they mean only the individuality of the middle-class owner of property, a person who must be swept out of the way. Freedom as exploitation. Bourgeois freedom is merely the freedom of trade and the freedom to exploit wage labor. Devaluation of human worth. Capitalism has resolved personal worth into exchange value, leaving only the cash payment nexus between people. It drowns noble human emotions in egotistical calculation and turns professionals like poets, artists, and scientists into its paid wage laborers. Even sacred relations like family and love become objects of commerce. The alienated worker. The worker is completely dependent, living only to increase the capitalist's capital and only so long as the interests of the ruling class require it. This leads to the famous formulation from the Manifesto. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. The worker is physically and spiritually crippled, becoming a mere appendage of the machine. The central thesis: collective freedom precedes individual freedom. Faced with this dehumanizing system, the worker has no choice but to unite with others in a constant and stubborn class struggle to abolish capitalist wage slavery. An individual worker is powerless against monopoly capital. This leads to the chapter's foundational argument, which the author attributes to a 1906 writing by J. V. Stalin. Marxism is built upon the cornerstone of the masses. The core principle is that there can be no true emancipation of the individual without the prior emancipation of the masses. Therefore, the emancipation of the masses is the main condition for the emancipation of the individual. The chapter concludes by stating that the socialist revolution in the USSR has fully and completely confirmed this Marxist-Leninist proposition, creating a society where the working people are conscious and free creators of their own history. Chapter 2. The Individual under Socialism. The new foundation of society. The victory of socialism in the USSR brought about a radical change in the relationships between people, society, and the individual. The foundation of these new relations is the socialist ownership of the means of production. This system has abolished exploiting classes and the exploitation of man by man. The relations between people in the production process are now those of comradely cooperation among individuals freed from exploitation. The author emphasizes that socialist production relations provide full scope for the development of productive forces, especially the most important one, the laboring masses themselves. Marxian socialism views the development of the individual as the development of a vital productive force. As the author puts it, people, personnel, are the most valuable capital in the world. The individual, under discussion, is not an abstract concept, but the millions of workers, collective farmers, and Soviet intellectuals who are building a communist society. Real versus fictitious liberty. The chapter draws a sharp contrast between the empty promises of bourgeois democracy and the concrete guarantees of Soviet socialist democracy. The hypocrisy of bourgeois freedom under capitalism, proclaimed rights and liberties are hollow for the working people. The author asks a series of rhetorical questions to illustrate this. Is an exploited worker free from their capitalist employer? Is a tenant farmer free from their landlord or from monopoly capital? Is a journalist free from monopolistic publishers who buy their conscience along with their writing? Is a scholar free from the tycoons who own the universities and labs? What meaning does personal liberty have for an unemployed worker who is hungry and fears for their family's survival? Capitalist society always has millions of unemployed, creating constant fear and pressure even for those who have jobs. Real liberty can only exist where exploitation, oppression, unemployment, and poverty have been abolished. The guarantees of Soviet democracy, in contrast, focuses on actually ensuring genuine rights by guaranteeing them materially and economically. The Stalin Constitution, described as the Great Charter of Socialism, guarantees all citizens the right to work, to rest and leisure, and to education, the right to maintenance in case of sickness and old age, full equality of rights between men and women, and among all races and nations, freedoms of speech, press, assembly, and demonstration, which are ensured by placing the necessary material resources, printing presses, paper, meeting halls, at the disposal of the working people. A new social principle. The main principle of socialism is, each works to the best of his ability, and is rewarded according to the quantity and quality of work he does. This principle fundamentally alters how an individual's worth is measured. He who works best is held in the greatest honor. This allows plain workers and farmers to become nationally celebrated figures, like the Stakhanovites and heroes of socialist labor, based purely on their personal labor, capabilities, and heroism. Leadership positions in the USSR are held by the most capable and devoted citizens, who can be recalled at any time if they lose the people's confidence. The emancipation of women and youth. The chapter highlights the liberation of women and the opportunities for youth as key proofs of socialism's superiority. Women's liberation. The status of women is presented as a crucial measure of any society's true nature. Under capitalism, working women endured a double yoke, class oppression in society, and enslavement within the family. The Soviet system, however, brought women freedom and full equality in every sphere of life. The Soviet government quickly repealed the old shameful laws that sanctioned women's lack of rights and established equal pay for equal work. Education was open to women, with female enrollment in higher educational institutions rising from 15% in 1914 to 49.3% in 1940. Women have become a major force in science, with 35,000 female scientific workers in 1947, compared to a mere handful in Tsarist Russia, who often had to go abroad to study. Women are active in political life, with over 480,000 elected to local Soviets and 277 elected to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR in its second convocation. The Soviet youth capitalism is depicted as stripping youth of their joy, dreams, and noble impulses, condemning them to be wage slaves or cannon fodder in imperialist wars. In the socialist land, however, youth are free from the fear of unemployment and have every opportunity for creative labor and development. The party and state cultivate in them the noblest human qualities. Soviet youth are at the forefront of building communism, constructing bridges, power stations, and socialist cities, and their heroism was proven by the immortal exploits of figures like Zoya Kosmodyminskaya and the heroes of Krasnodon during the war. Equality and individuality. Redefine. The author refutes the defamation that socialism aims to equalize everyone's inclinations and tastes into a drab, Baroque-like existence. It is capitalism, the author argues, that levels down the masses and suppresses their individuality. Citing Stalin, the text clarifies that Marxist equality means the abolition of classes, not the leveling of individual needs. It means equal emancipation from exploitation, equal abolition of private property in the means of production, an equal duty for all to work according to their ability, and an equal right to be paid according to their work under socialism or their needs under communism. While the first phase of communism, socialism, cannot yet ensure complete material equality, it establishes a new and just foundation for a person's role in society. This leads to the chapter's culminating principle, a quote from Stalin that defines the law of individual development under socialism. It is not property status, not national origin, not sex, nor office, but personal ability and personal labor that determines the position of every citizen in society. Chapter 3. The universal development of the individual and the traits of the new man. The goal, universal development, and the end of old divisions. The central goal and inevitable trend of socialist society is the universal development of the individual, the flourishing of all their physical and spiritual faculties, abilities, and talents. This historic task is accomplished primarily by overcoming the old, antagonistic contrast between physical and mental labor, a key condition for the transition from socialism to communism. Socialism creates the new, universally developed people it needs by systematically abolishing the old division of labor that enslaved and crippled humanity for centuries. This old system was defined by the deep divide between town and country, the chasm between physical and mental labor, the lifelong chaining of a person to a single, narrow profession or trade. This division didn't just harm the working masses, it also spiritually stunted the ruling classes, who became enthralled by their passion for filthy lucre, entrapped by their own physical and mental short-sightedness, and stunted specialized education. The new socialist specialist, while capitalism turns the worker into a mere appendage of the machine, socialism transforms them into a skilled craftsman, organizer, and engineer who supervises machines. However, this all-sided development does not mean creating dilettanti jacks of all trades. Citing Comrade Stalin, the author clarifies that specialization is necessary and expedient. A doctor does not need to specialize in physics, nor a botanist in medicine. The key difference lies in the type of specialist. Unlike the narrow bourgeois specialist, the Soviet specialist combines a profound study of their particular field with a mastery of Marxism-Leninism, the science of society's development. This makes them a socially minded specialist who can successfully advance science and production for the benefit of the entire people. The Stakhanov movement, forging the new man in labor. The Stakhanovites are presented as the embodiment of this new type of worker. They are not simply hard workers, but people who represent a new, communist attitude toward labor. Masters of technique, they are cultured, technically trained individuals who have mastered their trade and can squeeze the last drop of good out of the available technology. Innovators, they are revolutionaries in the organization of work, constantly shattering old production standards and discovering new, more rational methods. The historic importance of the Stakhanov movement is that it prepares the conditions for the transition to communism by raising the cultural and technical level of the entire working class to the level of engineers and technicians. The chapter provides numerous examples of these innovators, such as milling machine operator Dmitry Bozy, who initiated the 1000%ers movement by exceeding his production standard tenfold, and leather cutter Vasily Matrasov, who created a plan to generalize the best methods and raise his entire shop to the Stakhanovite level. This movement is not just about individual records, but about the scientific organization of collective labor to lift the entire mass of workers. The new intelligentsia and political leaders, the Soviet system has cultivated a new socialist intelligentsia from the ranks of ordinary workers and farmers. These are not isolated academics, but figures inseparably connected with the people, inspired by the great ideas of communism. The chapter contrasts the tragic fate of brilliant minds, like Tsiolkovsky and Michurin under the Tsarist regime, with the support and recognition they received from the Soviet state, which saved their work and made it the possession of the people. Michurin's bold creed, "We cannot wait for favors from nature, we must wrest them from her," is presented as being imbued with the Bolshevik spirit. Similarly, the party trains political leaders of a new type, in the image of Lenin and Stalin. Citing Stalin's characterizations, the text lists the essential traits of these leaders: modesty, simplicity, fearlessness, adherence to principle, iron will, revolutionary optimism, and an utter devotion to the people. The moral and political character of Soviet man socialism cultivates a new morality, directly opposed to that of societies based on private property, which fosters greed, egoism, and careerism. The socialist individual does not see themselves in opposition to the collective, but finds their happiness and creative energy within it. This does not mean contradictions cease to exist. Survivals of capitalism in people's minds, e.g., individualism, bureaucracy, nationalism, still create friction between personal and public interests. These are overcome through the method of Bolshevik criticism and self-criticism, which the author, citing A. Zhdanov, calls a real motive force of our development, and a new law of dialectics. Without it, a person stops growing and degenerates. This process creates a person of a higher moral and political stature. As Comrade Stalin noted, the humblest Soviet citizen stands head and shoulders above any high-placed foreign bigwig whose neck wears the yoke of capitalist slavery. The future, the realm of freedom. The chapter concludes with a vision of the future communist society. The gradual transition will bring a gigantic increase in production and an abundance of all material and cultural values. The complete abolition of the distinction between physical and mental work. Work will transform from a duty into a prime necessity of life, an inner urge for a healthy organism. This abundance will allow society to implement the principle of communism, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. In this future, the individual, freed from material worries and the mental birthmarks of capitalism, will finally become an all-sidedly, harmoniously developed being in the true realm of freedom that people have dreamed of for millennia.